Three.
Hey,
Hello, everyone. It's tournament time. It's the best time of the year here in Minnesota girls basketball. We got the tournament. I'm Eric, Junior All-Star here. I'm going to kick it to my colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we're going to do some previews, predictions, and maybe some prediction upsets, best matchups, all of that coming up. We'll kick it over to Mike.
Well, I'm Mike Peden. I am one of the broadcasters for the state basketball tournaments, and I can't think of a better preamble than today's college tournament finals, the quartet of them. But I have been a writer and broadcaster. I've been doing broadcasting for 18 years now, and you will see me on Wednesday, if I'm allowed to get a plug in, on NSPN. I'll be calling the Class 3A quarterfinals with Benilde St. Margaret's Minneapolis Roosevelt, followed by Stewartville and St. Peter. But you probably have seen me on a whole lot of stations throughout the metro, and I don't plan on slowing down anytime soon.
What we like to hear. And then we'll go to Pat.
I'm Pat Barrett. Thanks for welcoming me tonight. I wear many hats in the world of girls basketball. I also broadcast for NSPN, and I'm on Thursday starting at 11 o'clock, Mayor Lutheran and the number one seed. Good God, drawing a blank. Don't tell
Good
me.
you. Oh,
Goodhue,
my
yes.
bad.
Moved down from 2A to 1A. So that's the first game of the tournament. And then Underwood will take on Southwest Minnesota Christian in the second game of that one. I'm also the chair for Miss Minnesota Basketball. I'm emceeing the banquet on Tuesday nights. And I help with the Hall of Fame for our Coaches Association, as well as liaison to the high school league. So that's what I do in my free time.
Doesn't sound like a lot of free time, but I like to hear it.
It's not, but it's all great.
Well, what we'll do is I said we got the brackets. We're ready for Wednesday. We're with about 72 hours away from things kicking off. Let's start with 1A. We talked a little bit about the one seed Goodhue. You got them. You got the two seed, Mountain Iron Buell, the defending champs. Pat, we'll start with you. Are we just heading towards a 1 versus 2 matchup? Who are some of the names and some of the teams that we're thinking maybe can shake things up in this bracket?
I'd be very surprised if it isn't 1 versus 2. I think Goodhue is a power in 2A, and now I've dropped down to 1. Obviously, the defending champs are back in Mountain Iron Buell with Jordan Zubik and Sabala. They've got the 1-2 punch. Mayor Lutheran isn't an easy first round matchup for Goodhue. They didn't get a good draw, I don't think, when you draw them out of the envelope, and I also do that, so blame me. But but I still will be surprised if we don't see Mountain Iron Buell and Goodhue going at it on Saturday at noon.
Mike, who are some of the names and some of the teams you think could shake things up here in 1A?
Well, it's funny, when the seeds came out, I was waiting and waiting, along with a lot of other fans, yesterday for the seeds to get released. And Goodhue Mountain Iron Buell 1 versus 2. I happened to cover the regular season meeting between those two. And I did see Buffalo Lake Hector Stewart in that field as well. Mountain Iron Buell took care of them pretty handily at the Tip-Off Classic, but Goodhue and Mountain Iron Buell met at Granite City. And to your point on names, it was the absence of one late in the game that really impacted the finish. Jordan Zubich fouled out midway through the second half. It took Goodhue a little while to find their footing. For most of the game, they just seemed a little rattled. They didn't look all that comfortable, but with about 4 or 5 minutes left, they flipped the switch, found that extra gear, and just flat out dominated, got on a quick turnaround. So the names, and my knowledge of Class A is a bit limited. I've seen only 3 of the 8 teams, but for Goodhue, you've got what I call the big 3, Elizabeth Gadian. She is a great all-around player. Kendall Littlemeyer would also fit in that category. And Julia Carlson, if memory serves correctly, handles the post quite well. I feel like those 3 will give Goodhue quite the edge. And you look at the schedule Goodhue had throughout the season, even though they went down from Class 2A to Class A, they weren't afraid to take on some tough foes. They had Providence Academy again this year. They play Stewartville, I think, twice. They're in the same conference, and Byron, so they get some tune-ups there. They play Crosby Ironton at Granite City. and also beat Becker. I feel like that's going to prepare them well. Mountain Iron Buell, not afraid of a challenge either, as we know. They will play anybody. But outside of Jordan Zubich and Hallie Savala, they didn't look like they had a whole lot. So I feel like if it is going to be 1 versus 2, as Pat predicts, Jordan Zubich is going to need to put together a fantastic tournament, which she's done before. They won it all last year, but she can't run into any kind of foul trouble. And if she has a rough game from the floor, that could spell trouble in the later rounds for Mountain Iron Buell. But I think those are going to be the names that will get the most attention in the Class A field.
Having seen Mike, Zubich does have that tendency to get into foul trouble, no matter what the game situation. Typically, she's incredibly aggressive on both ends of the floor, and that can be the trap because they need her to dominate, but they can't afford to have her off the floor. And when you think about it, Goodhue just took apart Hayfield the other night to win the section, and Hayfield had an outstanding team too in 1A. So Goodhue has to be the favorite going into it.
That I'll give a shout out to the Buffalo Lake Hector. I think the Cockty sisters, I'm excited to see them at state. Though they're two, they play really well off each other. Both, I got to kind of know them as the Nickel Dickle legends out there in the Waconia Nickel Dickle 3-on-3 tournament. They've kind of taken over winning like that tournament and winning the 3-on-3 or 3-point contest. They're pretty special. So I'm excited to see them at state. What would you guys say in this bracket? What's the best maybe potential second round matchup or most exciting potential second round matchup that we could see in this bracket? We'll start with Pat.
It's got to be Buffalo Lake Hector and Mountain Iron Buell. It can be an absolute shootout when those two teams get together. Always, Eric, I would say 1A is always the deepest tournament. They go deeper than anyone else. For Goodhue to have to turn around and play a tough competition in Mayor Lutheran in the first round, you just don't see those kind of matchups in any of the other classes.
Right. Mike, agree. I'll agree with Pat. I think that's the best second round matchup. I'm excited to see possible Buffalo Lake and Mountain Iron Buell. I think that could be fantastic.
You would be hard pressed to argue against that notion. And as Pat said, with Class A and between Pat, Grant, I think anyone you talk to would say Class A is the ultimate wild card, because not only do you have a deep field, you also, it's actually a bit rare that we could get some rematches here in Class A, because that, at least in my experience, that seemingly isn't the case with geography. That's where you get all the small towns. So you don't always get the common opponents that we'll see in the later classes. But if I recall, Underwood had something of an upset. They weren't exactly a push, 27-3, but they took down a solid Hancock team, the Hancock team that beat Goodhue at the tip-off classic to get into the field. And they get Southwest Minnesota Christian, a 28-2 team. So I think the winner of that game might give Goodhue a run for their money. And I'm not trying to be a contrarian and saying that the other side of the bracket's going to be better than MIB BLHS, but you've got a couple of teams, the 5-4, 5 combined losses. And again, Underwood, you have to think they're going to have quite a bit of momentum knocking off a Hancock team that could have easily been in this field. So we could have 2 great semifinals during the Friday afternoon session.
I like it.
I think if you look across the board, all 4 classes, the semifinals could be special.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt about it. There's going to be some decent quarterfinals. I'd say more than we've seen for a while, but the semifinals can be spectacular.
So here's my favorite part of it. I can start on this one if you want me to, or I'll go last either way. Here's the prediction. Who's walking away with the Class 1A championship? Want me to go first?
Sure.
I'll go Goodhue. I'm going to say Elizabeth Gadiant. That matchup with Mountain Iron Buell, her length and speed and just control of the game to be able to control it from scoring and setting up her teammates. And I think her defense is, even if it can be underrated, like she affects the game so well from the defensive aspect of it and just can take over with steals and deflections. I think the matchup with her and Zubich is so interesting because she's actually someone that can provide length on Jordan. So those long, deep threes, she's right there in her face. She's right on her. She can make it around screens. I'm gonna go with Goodhue. I think they're winning the 1A title this year.
I'll go with you. I don't. The fact they get to play such a tougher schedule because of their conference foes just helps you so much throughout the season. I used to call it the St. Michael factor when they were stuck at the Mississippi 8. Is after Christmas they never got a decent game. From the time they've moved over to the Lake Conference, they've put themselves on the map to win a state title almost every one of those years.
Mm-hmm.
Mountain Iron Beal works so hard to go anywhere to play anybody. It's just not the same when you have probably 15 games after Christmas that are running time.
Right.
You know, that hurts them in the long run. There's no doubt about it. Could they still win? Yeah. Goodhue's definitely the favorite.
Fair. Mike, prediction for the champ?
Guess I'll make it a sweep. I teased it, you could say, with the recap of the Goodhue Mountain Iron Beal game that I called. And the conference affiliation certainly helps. Who they played outside the conference. I've often said you can get a good sense of who really thinks they're a contender based on who they schedule outside the conference. And Goodhue, they took a lot of risks this year. Took a few bumps in the Hiawatha Valley. I think that's their conference. But again, that's not entirely unexpected, but it does prepare them for this run. And I think of all the Class A teams, they have the enough depth, if not the best amount of depth among their, especially among their starters, because I know rotations tend to shorten up with the TV timeouts. But I just think they have enough pieces. I think Pat and I, at the start of the year, we said the state champions usually have what we call a big three, sometimes more, but you need in this era at least three go-tos, and Goodhue has that. Mountain Iron Beal, I'm not sure they do, but if you run all the simulations, that's why I think Goodhue
Right.
will be the favorites. And you know, they held their own in Class 2A the last couple of years, and they won back-to-back titles in Class A, and I think they're ready to hoist another one.
I like it. Now let's kick it up to 2A. And have we ever had a tournament with so many non-seniors being 3,000 point scorers in one bracket as we do in this one? Because we got three of them, and they're on, I think, 1, 3, and 4 seeds here. So I think we'll kick it up to Pat. What's the first thing to step out with you in this 2A? Loaded, loaded with talent up and down, loaded with like scoring all up and down this bracket.
Like you said, these are the kids we're going to be watching for quite some time. Obviously, this is Albany's team, and they played Providence tough last year. But when you talk about Orline, Mac, and Greenway, I mean, you're just talking. You know, the closest comparison is Wagner and Dolman. Is
Yep.
the closest comparison we have. If those kids get on the floor, it can be epic. You know, that's going to be the fun.
I like it. Mike, what's some of the names, teams, what's some of the storylines that stand out to you in this bracket?
Well, it's the return of the unicorns. All three, Addie Mack, Tori Orline, and Madden Greenway made the show last year. And I think they all want to make deeper runs. When you look at the bracket and how that was seeded, I saw Crosby Ironton getting the 4-5, so they could get another rematch or a second try with Providence Academy. The first meeting, Providence had a little more depth. Like Pat was saying earlier, you've got a lot of names, and I'm looking up and down the field. In the Class 2A field, you have 4 of the state's top 10 scores in the same bracket. Orline, Greenway, Mac, 1, 2, and 3, and then Willow Thiel of Perham. Let's not forget about them. I think that loss to Minnehaha might have put them in the second tier. I'm not saying they'll upset Providence Academy, but Willow, not exactly a slouch if you followed her at all. So I'm just, so many names come to mind. So there's Perham Providence, Crosby Ironton, Tori Orline, of course. So what kind of magic can she conjure up? New London Spicer, they don't have the explosive playmakers, but you've got Dakota Rich, Ava Carlson, and Mike Dreyer, the I think the all-time record holder for most career wins. That New London Spicer team, they may not always win state, but they always are seemingly in the mix. Albany, Alyssa Sand going to St. Thomas. I think Kylan Garrett part of that group. They got the win over Providence Academy, and I think it was strength of schedule that gave Providence the 1 seed over Albany, even though the Huskies had the head-to-head. And then a Rochester Lord team that pulled off an upset of sorts in beating Winona Cotter. I thought Cotter was going to make the show for the first time in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then Peden, no, that was Class A. I'm getting my initials mixed up. With Minnehaha, Addie Mack gets a lot of the attention. Angel Hill having a tremendous senior year. We finally got to see the impact she can have when she's fully healthy. Sine Hill, I felt, really took a step forward. And now that I remember on the Providence side, I feel Ari Peterson has done the same for the Lions, being that glue player that the Count sisters were. I know we were talking for a couple of years, Eric, doing this preview about a possible all IMAC showdown, and there's an opportunity we might get it, but that semifinal round is going to be filled with so many storylines that it wouldn't shock me if, say, New London Spicer sneaks in there, or if Albany goes back and gets another chance. I think it would be, what, 3 times in the last 4 years if it's Albany and Providence Academy?
4 in a row. They've
4 in a row.
3 times that they met for the championship. They met in semifinals the other years.
Yeah,
they met
3 out of 4.
Yep.
That's sort of, yeah. So 3 out of 4 championship, 4 in a row. Yeah, I think take your pick. I feel like WEM is wondering what about us, but there's just
fair
a lot of names. I feel like, I don't want to say it's the most star-studded, but it certainly has a legion of young, wily veterans out there.
And that's what I know. I'll kind of piggyback off what Mike said. I'm curious to see what those Robins to the Batwomans kind of, I would say like the Sine Hills, the Ari Peterson, Sammy Hatchie kind of with Tori Orline at Crosby Ironton. We know the big names, but what kind of we always see in the state, what separates is those others, those ones that kind of rise up to the occasion. Ari and Sine, I think, really both took levels up, level forward, and they kind of took responsibility on their shoulders for big production buckets, staying on the court. How do they perform in their first state tournament where they're not just these, young guns off the bench kind of, coming in, providing depth. They're expected to perform. They're expected to stay at state and stay on the court and perform at a high level. Sammy Hatchie, we've seen games for Crosby Ironton. She's that defensive kind of help for her. She gets out and run. Tori loves to, kick it up for a quick pass up. So, I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking at there. We'll get to Pat for this one. What's the best potential second round matchup in your opinion in this bracket?
It's Albany and Minnehaha. If people want to see Orline and Greenway go at it, absolutely. But it's Minnehaha and Albany are 2 of the class of the state, really. Even though they're 2A, they play tough and they play people above them. That's going to be a great matchup. And this is Albany's best last chance. They're dominated by seniors. Yep. Garrett's a spectacular player. Sand, Rusin got a beauty there. Finley's had a really good year for them. I had their section final the other night, and they just walloped Holdingford. And Holthouse took the game over. She was the one who drove the whole engine. Sand got a little bit of foul trouble, and Garrett's was really good. But it was Holthouse who was at the front of their press, was making steals and setups and scored and did it all. So they got a great team. The where I see the trap's going to be for Providence is Counts hasn't had a great year, and I know she's had ankle problems. They need her to become some semblance of the sisters. Both sisters gave scoring and rebounding every night. The youngest sister brings the rebounding, brings the defense, doesn't bring the consistent scoring. And so now you're counting on an 8th grader to have to step up and be that piece. Or Honecker, who's had a great career for him shooting, but I saw him lose a couple games. And the games I saw, she didn't shoot it well, and people are aware of her. So if they put somebody on her and just tell them to stay with her, and then you take on the rest, they're going to need Peterson and or Counts to step up to beat Albany, Minnehaha, or even New London or Crosby Ironton.
Mike, how about you? Best second round matchup? Are we going for the 3000 sophomore rematch? We going for the other side of the bracket?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define best. I think Pat, if you're looking for Pat, got it for competitive ability, Albany and Minnehaha Academy, because those two didn't play each other, and yet they have similar resumes. Minnehaha, they nearly took one. Well, they nearly took both against Providence Academy, just didn't quite have enough to get to the finish line. And Albany, when you look at who they played, their lone loss, I think, to Mountain Iron Buell had some impact on the seeding. So Albany and Minnehaha, I really have to give props to what Damian Lawler has done with that team. And Matt Pryor did a terrific job. He was a great coach, got them a state title, and kept them a competitive force all the way through his tenure. But what Lawler has done with that group, there are some folks who are saying, well, they focus too much on offense, not defense. And I look at that Minnehaha team. They looked a lot quicker this year. They had a little more poise about them, and it's similar to Providence. I feel like sometimes their best defense is their offense. And so when you factor in what Minnehaha has been able to do, and toward the end of the season, let's not forget they eked out a close one with Marshall. That's never a win you're going to shrug off. So to get a chance at Albany and to do it with a lot of the same players as last year, to see them grow as much as they have, I think that's going to be the best of the two semifinals. But like you said, Eric, if you're into milestones and want to see what might happen there, I'm curious how that New London Spicer Crosby game is going to play out, because I wasn't there to see it, but I was following on the Minnesota scores feed. Crosby Ironton, they just barely squeaked past Pequot Lakes.
Yep.
And a lot of their team is concentrated on Orline. You mentioned Sammy Hatchie and I think Margaret Sildren are the other two players who typically can contribute, but Orline is the centerpiece of that team. So I feel like the 3,000 point rematch would be a lot of fun, but New London Spicer, I think they have a good chance of getting out of that quarterfinal. So that's why I got to go with Albany Minnehaha. But single elimination, you never know.
I'll agree on many. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
you beat New London, you got to shoot the ball well, because they're going to play their extended 2-3 zone. And if you don't shoot well, you're not going to beat them. You know, we laughed the other day. I believe Wendy Kohler of Alexandria is now approaching 700 wins. Brian Cosgrove, I think, has over 600. I think you put the two together, they match up to about Mike Dreyer's record. If that gives you some perspective on how good he is and how long he's been doing this. The trap for them, I don't think they've played as tough a schedule. And I think that can catch you when you get to this time of the year. Sooner or later, I said, everyone, I don't care if it's a pro or a third grader, look up and go, I'm not sure we're ready for this moment yet. Right. And obviously they've been to state year after year after year, but it's still different when you start playing against the likes of Tori Orline. And so obviously to play big, but can they handle her is the question.
Yeah, I'd say Albany and Minnehaha. And one of the things I think about for Minnehaha is because I think one of the knocks on them was possible post presence or forwards and stuff that could handle. And then I look at their they have a win against De La Salle. And De La Salle, in my opinion, has one of the most versatile physical post players in Jordan Johnson. And while to me, Sand is not, her and Jordan are different types of post players, different types of bodies, different types of physicality. I think you can bring up some of the same defensive principles that you used for Jordan on Alyssa. Neither one of them are 3-point shooters. Both of them are going to try and kind of get their buckets from around the basket. If you can add a lot of speed, a lot of feet around them when they're going for rebound or when they're trying to make moves and spins, just have kind of bodies around them. They maybe aren't as most able to kind of like handle that kind of pressure. You're taking the chance that the shooters are going to miss for Albany, but I'd love to see it at Minnehaha, Albany. It's a contrast in styles. You have star power up and down there. You have the Addie Max, the Sands, the Jareds. I mean, even Tatum Finley, I think she's been big for Albany this year, hitting, she hit the game-winning 3 when they beat Crosby by 3 points. So I feel like that would be a great one. I will say, I think I think we're headed towards round 4 of Albany and Providence. Personally, I think after being in the arena for that matchup at Albany, I mean, that was a packed gym, absolutely packed. And I think Albany, I said, it kind of, I compare Madden a little bit to like Caitlin Clark. If you get her on a cold night, you better buy a lottery ticket after that because the cold night for her is not always going to happen. She went 2 for 13 on threes in that Albany game when they lost by 2. And she got a really good open look with about 6 seconds left with the game tied. She missed it. If I'm a betting man and Madden Greenway gets that look again to win a game, I'm gonna bet that one's going down personally. So I'm excited to see if we get the rematch. Albany versus Providence, or not Albany, Minnehaha versus Providence. Like you said, I think Minnehaha played 2 of their best games all season in their 2 losses to Providence. They did it in different ways. The first one you had Angel Hill with 7 made threes. She was doing, she was helping Addie Mack immensely. Couldn't stop her from outside the arc, all of that. And you lose on an Emma Milliburn 3-pointer. And if you're a defensive player guarding Providence and you say, hey, we got the ball out of Madden's hands for a final shot, I think a lot of coaches in the state would take that and say, we'll live with Madden having the ball out of her hands for the final shot. Emma just hit a big shot. The second time, they hit like 9 threes in the first half. I mean, you were getting it from Amina, from Sine, from Angel, from Addie. And then you look up and like you're only up 5 at half. And like that has to kind of play a little bit into your mentality. Like we're only up 5 and we were played fantastic. So I would be curious for round 3. The age old added. It's hard to beat a team 3 times. We've seen it at all levels of sport. So we'll go to Pad here. Favorite part? Who's your prediction to walk out of the 2A bracket?
Ugh.
A little hard. This
I
one's a little harder.
team with the best player. I think it's going to be Albany and Providence, and I can't bet against Madden Greenway. I think that the most balanced team is Albany. Are they balanced enough to beat Greenway? I hope we get to see it. I think that would be a great championship game. And last year, it was the coming out party for Alyssa Sand. And if they're going to get there and beat them, she needs coming out party number 2.
And Mike, who's your prediction?
You could ask me this multiple times. If you ask me this 100 times, I might give you 100 different responses because I think Class 2A is that close, which again, I think speaks to what Albany has been able to do, what Minnehaha was able to do, because at the start of the year, I remember thinking Providence was the only sure bet to win a state championship. And now it's like, hey, there's a whole lot of possibilities here. At risk of being put on the outside from a certain fan who will be following along, I think Eric will get a sense of what I'm talking about. We might not be allowed in a certain gym. I would give the edge to Providence because of the history. You probably have heard the saying, act like you've been here before. Providence, they've won the last 2 titles. They finished second the year before. And kind of like what we saw today with Iowa, Nebraska in that rematch for the Big Ten championship, Caitlin Clark, Iowa's best player, stepped up in crunch time, the second half. Madden Greenway, like you said, went 2 of 13 from 3-point range. I noticed this year with Providence, and this is where, again, I've said this is awfully close. So I am picking Providence, but it's not like I'm going to be flying their flag per se, if you know what I'm talking about. Because there were some times this year I covered the game against Maple Grove. You were there as well, yep, where Maple Grove got the win. And there were some moments where I felt Madden maybe tried forcing it a little too much. And I'm not suggesting she's a ball hog, not in the slightest. No, she understands her teammates. There were a couple of times where I'm thinking, hey, you got Emma Millerberg, you've got R.A. Peterson, Honecker, and Hope Counts. If she has an on game, you can feed it to her too. So if she can remember, I'd say to glide. And again, this is really first world nitpicking here when you look at all the things Madden has accomplished this season and her career. But I feel that's going to be something to watch. Madden's certainly not afraid to take the initiative. I think she, as Pat was said, is the best player in that class. Maybe not by much, but when you have that, I'm leaning toward Providence, but Albany Minnehaha to me could also win the title, and it wouldn't surprise me. It is that close in 2A.
My vote is influenced by being in that game at Albany, because I said that maybe is one of the best non-state tournament environments I've ever been in. I mean, they wheeled in extra bleachers for more fans. They packed that Albany gym, and it was loud, and both teams were engaged. And I look at all that, and you had Madden with a kind of a cold 3-point shooting night. I think Hope and Ari both eventually fouled out at one point in the game. And, Sand and Jared kind of really seemed to, thrive. They were getting down low, getting points. And I look at all that, and then I look up and I'm like, Providence lost by 2. And Madden had, and I still say, like, I look at that video, and the reason I know of the shot is because I took a video because I try to get like videos of game winners and stuff. And she was open from the corner 3. And I'm like, if that, I mean, and she's that close from, having a huge win. I even said, like, typical Madden, she was 1 for 11 before, like, at one point, and then she hits the 3 to tie it at 68 with a step back with a hand in her face. She's gonna hit the big ones. She's gonna at least take the big ones. I think Providence is gonna learn from that, and I think when you're even that close in a game that Albany seemingly should probably have had by what felt like they were up by 10, winning by 2. I think Providence is gonna find a way. Kind of like last year at State in the second half, Grace Counts was that person that found a way to stop Sand or slow Sand down. I think you need to have that from either Ari or, like you said, Hope, maybe even Emma. If Emma can maybe slow down Jared's, or they can maybe use her as someone to come down and throw another body at Sand. I just think Providence is going to find a way to get the three-peat done. And like Pat said, I ain't betting against Madden Greenway. And we will move on to another highly competitive one, one that maybe had a little more talk on bracket after they were released, but we will see how this goes. 3A. So I remember last year, De La Salle put the world on notice, having the 1 seed in at the time with Kendall McGee, even De La Salle or Benilde St. Margaret down 17 in the second half of the at one point in the game last year. Benilde came back, and we kind of saw how that, that they kind of found a way to get rolling and take it back. Are we thinking that's the matchup again? What's some of the storylines and players you're seeing, Pat, in this bracket?
Um, into the season, I thought there were 3. It was Benilde, it was De La Salle, it was Alexandria. It sounds like Alexandria had one of their starters break her hand in the
Oh,
last couple of weeks.
okay.
So I watched them play De La Salle at the breakdown in Hopkins, and I thought De La Salle was just a little stronger at that point. If they've lost another starter, I think that's a huge setback for that Alexandria team. To me, it's Benilde and De La Salle, and I think De La Salle has made huge strides throughout the year as I've watched them play. Benilde hasn't been beaten with Olivia Olson,
Right.
and they've just been walloping people. And I ended up beating Delano in the section final, and Delano had 1 loss all year. And I just think, again, I think the best player in 3A is on the Benilde St. Margaret team. And that take nothing away from De La Salle. Alexandria's had a spectacular season, and she again goes out and finds as many good games as she can, because she knows she needs to get ready to play in what I will call the Metro style of basketball. There is a huge difference in this state when you play an in the Metro game as opposed to an outstate game. It is just called differently. I was lucky enough to get to state 4 times, and every time I checked who my officials were going to be, because the games just get called differently.
Right.
And those 2 together, it'll be a street fight.
Mike, who's some of the names and storylines you're seeing? Are you seeing the same ones? I said I'll talk about that 4-5 matchup. I have pretty circled as maybe one of the best 4-5 matchups in all the brackets. I think that's going to be a highly competitive game.
Well, I'll start because Pat and I, of course, we run into each other a bit with NSPN work. State wrestling is one of those examples. And throughout the year, I would throw it out there just to see what kind of conversations he said. If you've been following basketball, that should give you a sense of how this will be seeded. So, yes, Benilde St. Margaret's lost to Alexandria and De La Salle, but that was without Olivia Olson. And as Pat noted, they have not lost a game since her return. And those wins include a victory over St. Michael Albertville at the community clash. I'm not going to say that was the one that put them over the top, but when you go in there and take down one of the perennials in 4A, the defending state champion from that class, that's going to get you some consideration.
Oh yeah.
And they schedule tough as well with some of the non-conference games. They can't do a whole lot about the Metro West. That I think that conference took a step back this year. But when you look at who they played outside of that, and I think more importantly, how they played after Olson's return, STMA, Stewartville, who's in the show, the Benilde St. Margaret's took care of them quite handily. So I think the biggest storyline is going to be perhaps the send-off for Olivia Olson. And to that point, I think it also speaks to how well Tim Ellefson has built up that team, because when Kendall was out and when it became clear that she wasn't going to come back to play, Olivia can carry the load. We've seen her do that before, but I think she was in a similar situation earlier in her varsity career before Tim came in, before they started adding some of these current pieces. And I don't want to say she was on an island, but it felt like that at times. And now you've got some solid role players in Zahara Bishop, Sydney Fridley, Mira Wismer, Kay Kapsner. I think Bishop would have the best chance of maybe rising next year with McGee. The others, maybe they're not superstars, but you can count on them more often than not to give you a dependable game. And so those are some of the other names for Benilde St. Margaret's. I have to give a nod to Totino Grace. I don't know how far they'll go, but they pulled off 2 upsets in Section 5 3A without their top player. Maria Radabaugh tore her ACL midway through the season, and they play in the Northwest Suburban. They're the only 3A school. So as Pat has been talking about, conference affiliation can really tune you up. So Totino Grace had to go up against Andover and Centennial and Maple Grove, as they always do. And it might knock their record down a peg or two, but it certainly helps prepare them. And for a team that was quote unquote rebuilding last year to make it into the show, I think will speak volumes about their competitiveness next year, if not this year. But they pulled the upset card once, and I don't know if they have the depth to do it again, but they made fools out of us 2 years ago. And that Stewartville St. Peter game, Stewartville with the upset over Byron in 1-3A, when it didn't always look like they had the strongest team, but they've got some solid 3-point shooters. I think Haydeen is one of them, and Taylor Clement, I think, also a part of that group. I covered them a couple of times. So you have to give them some salutation. And then we mentioned Delano earlier. That one loss was to St. Peter, if I'm correct.
Yep.
And they're in the show. I saw them early in the season at the Tip-Off Classic when they beat Becker. It was really hard to gauge how solid they were then, because Becker only had 1 field goal in the second half, and the law of averages would tell you that's probably not going to happen all the time. But Benilde St. Margaret's
today, Mike.
What?
Was shut out in the 4th quarter against Paige Beckers in Yukon today. They got shut out.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes, Marquette. That didn't hear you initially, but
and they won 20 games and got shut out in the 4th quarter.
Yeah, Marquette, no, not exactly a slouch, but that's just, how many games have you coached and bid in, and how many games have I called? The more you do, the more variance you'll see in the patterns that would seemingly bewilder you, but they happen. But names, I think this time around, Benilde St. Margaret's and De La Salle heading for that finish. I think the biggest question, maybe it's not so much names, the storyline for De La Salle, how can they handle things this time around? Because last year, you mentioned the state quarterfinal where they were up on Benilde St. Margaret's. They were up in the regular season meeting as well. They could not sustain leads in both those games. Can De La Salle play in front? And the second half of their schedule, I thought maybe left a little more to be desired. When the Tri-Metro, I think, took a step back. You can't do a whole lot about that. But some of the non-conference games that I saw De La Salle in the second half of the season compared to an Alexandria or Benilde St. Margaret's has me wondering how long will it take for them to get back into that mode. I don't think it will be long, but that is one of those complex layers I want to see unfold for the 3A field.
I think one of the things I'll say about De La Salle in terms of maintaining in games, it's not only on her shoulders, but I will say the games I've seen, there is a stark difference of Jordan Johnson on the court and Jordan Johnson on the bench. When they played Minnetonka that time at Anoka Ramsey Community College, they had a lead of 16-14 on Minnetonka when she got her second foul. And then within a minute and about 40 seconds, they went from that to up two to down 29-18. Just with her off because she commanded so much for like attention down low. She's so active on the rebounds. She's a good passer from her position. She has really good, I say, like patience as a post player. She's gonna do two hard dribbles, see and go which to the way from where the double is coming. If she can stay out of foul trouble and stay on the court, that just gives them enough. I mean, the defense has to come in. If they get to Benilde, I'm curious how someone, who do they put on her? Mira's probably height wise is better, is taller than her, but Jordan is so physically imposing. And as a volleyball player, her leaping ability is fantastic, and her timing is good. That second round, I'll kick this off. The second round matchup, possibly between Alexandria and De La Salle. I think Hadley Thal is kind of a Rubik's Cube that people's trying to figure out. Her and Kale Jonke, I think their body types are like, they're such matchup nightmares because of everything they can do and how long they are. Because I don't think De La Salle, even their two best players, if you look at Jordan and Nisha, neither one of them are great matchups for a Hadley. So Hadley can kind of roam. It's kind of what more help she can get. Same with Kale Jonke. And so, but I think Jordan is that there's not another post player, at least in 3A in this bracket, that can physically match her if she's staying on the court, fully engaged, getting the rebounds, getting the post scores, drawing the defense in. I think she's such a huge thing for them to maintain if they get a lead or if they're coming back or if they're staying playing well. Jordan is kind of that. You need her on the court because there's not another player that can match her well, at least.
There's nobody in the 3A who matches up with her. And you're right. If she's on the floor, she gives them a chance to win the state championship because she is such a matchup nightmare.
And so, favorite part here, this will be a hard one again. We'll make Mike do it first this time. Who's walking away with the 3A title, Mike?
This is the class where I feel like I had the easiest time making a selection, actually. But we'll have to see how, of course, it unfolds, because when I'm looking at the semis, De La Salle, Alexandria, the rematch, how might that go? But if St. Peter can get past Stewartville, and I think they have a good chance, St. Peter beat Stewartville by a pretty big margin in the first round. Ryan Holmgren and the Southworth sisters, if I'm correct, how might they fare against Benilde St. Margaret's? But like in 2A, the best player in that class is Olivia Olson, and another what I call unicorn, Olivia. Eric and I were there for her first game back with Jordan, and you see the impact she makes. A lot of times we gravitate toward the scoring because sometimes that's the only stat we can find on the hub or elsewhere. But when you watch her play, Olson, I remember when she got compared to Paige Becker some time ago, and I don't like comparing athletes to prior because everyone brings something a little different. But
Right.
the similarity that I think Olson has with Paige is that if she is having an off night, she doesn't get rattled. She'll look for other ways to step in. And that's going back to last year. She is an excellent rebounder. I think she is bumped up her passing a notch or two this season. And so Olivia is the ultimate utility player for Benilde St. Margaret's. And having that in your arsenal is going to be problematic for anyone who has to face them, because you can't just get in her face and expect you're home free. All right, she'll go dish it to Bishop or Wismer or Kapsner, or maybe she'll get that rebound that extends a possession or gets you those second chance points. But what she has been able to do this year and how Tim Ellefson has taken Benilde St. Margaret's to the next level, I feel like I have to give a nod to a team that hasn't lost since Olivia Olson came back, and there's a pretty good reason for that. So I think Benilde St. Margaret's, I'm not going to say, oh, they've got it, no one else can win it, but I feel like of all the returning champions, they have the best chance to defend, and that's why I'm picking Benilde St. Margaret's to repeat as 3A champions this year.
Pat, who's your pick?
I'll put on my hat as the chair of Miss Minnesota basketball. When you look for those kind of players, you see those aha moments on the floor, and they make everyone on their team better. And in watching Benilde this year, it looked like their pieces know what they're supposed to do. They're not trying to do more than they're supposed to. And she gets the ball to them where they can do it. And the times I've watched them, she makes them a really tough matchup. Now, saying that, I saw De La Salle. I think they got the best athletes, top to bottom. Scott's a dynamic point guard. Johnson's a nightmare matchup inside. Their other kids play the game really well. They're going to have to get by Alex first, and Alex first. But I think Benilde has the best player.
I'm going to make it a sweep. I kind of, in the same vein, when I said I can't bet against Madden, I can't bet against Olivia Olson. I mean, especially last year, when Kendall went down, it could have really been a mental fog for Benilde when they lost Kendall. And it was a determination you see in the greats that I'm not losing. Olivia had gotten to that, she'd gotten right to the finish line of having a state title, and she wasn't leaving without that crown, without the title. So I got to go with her again this year. I said De La Salle. I think if anyone thinks it's going to be an easy game for Benilde with De La Salle, I think De La Salle is right there and going to make sure that they earn every ounce of that title in the championship game. But I said I got to go with BSM in this one.
I got a great story to wrap up the 3A. Last year in the state title game, Shumpert hit the 2 big threes down the stretch. And I was part of the all tournament committee, and you have to turn it in by the middle of the second half. And it was down to Shumpert and a Stewartville girl. And I said, this is nuts. How long does it take to type in one more name? Nope, we got to have it. And at that point, Stewartville was winning by a few. We gave it to the Stewartville girl. Well, Shumpert doesn't get the all tournament team after hitting the 2 big threes down the stretch. And
do you mean Sierra?
The second that Olivia Olson found out that she didn't get it, she took her medal off and went over and put it on Shumpert. That's what great leaders do.
Do you mean Sierra Lumpkin, Pat, or
was it Lumpkin? I was saying.
Lumpkin had 3. Lumpkin had 3 of them in the
the final. Lumpkin had 6 threes.
My mistake.
No, hey, you know what? I'm sure Shumpert won't mind that shout out as a testament to how great BSM has been all these years.
But Lumpkin, and hey, that when I saw that is just what great players do.
Absolutely.
And I watched them early in the season. I thought they were a mess early in the season. They looked selfish early in the season, and I didn't see that at the state tournament at all. And I'm convinced that's why they won the state, is they really made huge steps as a team. And this year, when I've watched them, that's still there.
So we're going to the big dogs here. We're going to the traditional powerhouse of the rivals, the Lake Conference party that a few people are crashing. We're going to 4A. Pat, we'll kick it with you. Names, teams, what are the storylines that are standing out here for you in this one?
Well, let's face it. If we had the 64 March Madness bracket, this would have been the Lake Conference tournament. Top 3 seeds again are all Lake Conference. and they should be. They're the best teams. They play against each other night in and night out, and they get better because of it. But I'll say this: Maple Grove with a much tougher non-conference schedule this year, and they spread it out throughout their season because I'm convinced the last 2 years the St. Michael factor caught them. I don't think top to bottom anyone would say the Northwest Suburban is a great conference.
Right.
Top couple, fine. But when you got to play 14 or 16 conference games and the bulk of them after Christmas are blowouts, you're not going to get better. Your team's not going to practice the same way. And so he did a marvelous job this year building a good schedule, and they played much tougher. A win over Providence, that's a huge win. Played Hopkins in a really good game, played Minnetonka pretty tough. So they've prepared for this moment. What hurt them in the seeding was losing to St. Michael double digits early in the season. And I'll argue that's deserved. St. Michael is a really good team, with Jonke and Kraft, those two, and Hazelton does all the dirty work inside. The thing that even in the 4A, the only team that's got a post is Wilson from Lakeville North. Yep. And with Andy Berkbaum back coaching, and this is take nothing away from Cuppy and Clemens, because I think they did an awesome job there too. Andy's going to figure out how to use her in that quarterfinal matchup against Maple Grove, and that's going to be the tricky part. Now, Maple Grove's got the outstanding guard in Odie, and she makes everyone on that team better. I had the chance with Mike. We called the championship the Northwest Suburban. It was Andover and Maple Grove. And I said before the game, I said, it's the 3 of Maple Grove against the 4 of Andover. And whoever figures out how to shut down one of the other team's big play, that's who's going to win. At halftime, those 7 kids had every point. At halftime. Second half, they shut out the 2 top scorers for Andover and ran away with the title. And I just think that this is Maple Grove's best chance. They've got a good balanced team, but again, no true post inside. And that's where Wilson and Breton are going to be tough matchup for them in the quarters. Minnetonka's got to figure out how to get more out of other than their big 3. And that's what I've seen when I've watched them. If they get more out of that big 3, I think they're the favorite. But I will say this, Tara Starks, every kid who plays for her, you can see they absolutely know their absolute role. They are in the right spot at the right time all the time. And obviously they've got the outstanding player in Liv McGill. They've got the great complementary pieces with Woodson. I watched them take apart Wyzetta the other night, and they really shot poor early. And it was Wilson from the corner, I think, had 3 jumpers to keep them in the ballgame. They were down double digits midway through the first half. But all their pieces just fit together so well, and McGill knows how to involve them all to make them their best. And I don't think you can argue they've been the best team in Minnesota all season long. And, those that want the greatest game, it would be Minnetonka and Hopkins in the
To play off your Maple Grove thing, I agree. I think I've said this. I think I talked to Mike with this. Their losses to Maple Grove or to Hopkins and Minnetonka, I say, at the Tonka one, they were down 21 at half. At the Maple Grove one, they're down 20 at half. Both of those games, they get within 4 or 5. And especially when they came out of the Minnetonka one, it was an 11-0 run right out of half. And both of those, it's like, if you can put 2 halves together, you beat both of those teams because of how good Odie is and how, the others helping her with the shooting. The game that the Maple Grove lost, I said I was at that game. That was the game Jacayla Kraft got injured when she went down on that. And like the first play of the game, and Maple Grove was up 9-0. And I was like, oh, this ain't looking good for St. Michael. And I'll give her a shout out. Kale Jonke, I don't know, put her cape on that game and finished with 24 points, 17 rebounds, 7 blocks, and 7 steals. And I'm like, where's that Kale every day? Like every game, where's that Kale? Because that's what she's capable of. And that's how I don't know if Maple Grove, they were very cold from 3 in that game, but the Kale Jonke took over effect was huge. But like you said, but Maple Grove, like you said, the Providence game, they can score with everyone, and there's not like a slowdown effect, and you're having big people hit threes. Odie's getting them the ball in the right spot. If you give her an ounce of daylight, Odie's probably going to bury a three on you. In the Minnetonka one, they were down six. I want to say with like 5 minutes left, they were down six. 3 straight possessions. Odie got an open corner three that rimmed out on her. And I remember asking her afterwards, I'm like, you want those back, don't you? And she's like, more than anything. Because it was the same shot and open. And I was like, but if you give another chance for that, she's gonna drill those. So I agree. Maple Grove is a sneakily very strong 4 seed to those 3 Lake Conference teams. How about you, Mike? What's some of the names and some of the teams you're looking at?
Well, I'll start by taking the baton from Pat, speaking of Hopkins, because you and I, Eric, and just about everybody, well, maybe not Pat. Well, Pat's too smart. I'm sure he didn't think this at all, but a lot of us were saying, is this the last run for the Hopkins brigade, the Hopkins train? And in the breakdown book, Kevin Anderson, I liked his answer for a 4A champion where he put maybe not Hopkins. So this was the first time in over a decade where there was a lot of unknowns in the sense of we weren't expecting Hopkins to fall into the abyss, but first time in at least 10 years, maybe, where they didn't have a starting 5 with apparent Division I talent, at least right away. Well, they've won the section title in Section 6 10 straight years. They lost only once in conference to Minnetonka at the end. Their other 2 losses came to Iowa teams. I really think this year is a testament to how well Tara Starks runs her program. As Pat was saying, the Hopkins players, they don't make a lot of mental mistakes in the sense of where they need to go, where they need to position themselves for sets, routes, etc. She had been in the background, so to speak, with Metro Stars. Her daughter, of course, went to Hopkins all those years ago, TT. So the blueprint, the imprint had always been there, but this, I think, was her first year where she really had a chance to show this is what I can do. When she took over from Brian Cosgriff, she had a lot of talent. Of course, they were all familiar with her, but some knucklehead could say, well, you inherited all this talent. And the only player that I think anyone would know on a first name basis outside of us is Liv McGill. And look at what they have all done. Will it be enough to win the title? We shall see. But I think whatever happens this year is a signal that Hopkins isn't going to go anywhere, at least not into the fog in 4A. They're going to be here for a good long while. Other names, Rosemount. I want to see what they can do because Rosemount, if you recall, I think they were a point away from winning it all in 2021. But for the first time in a long time, the Ramlall sisters giving them a boost in speed, agility. So in the past, Chris Orr's teams, they were fundamentally sound, but they would try to slow you down. That was their best shot at winning. Rosemount able to speed things up. I feel like St. Michael Aberville.
That crowd match. Nevin St. Michael, that could be a great basketball game.
I feel like that could be the biggest upset watch in the 4 quarterfinals.
I agree.
And Rosemount, they picked up a win, over Wayzata at the Tip-Off Classic. That was overtime, I think it was.
Yes.
Or so.
Yep.
It was.
By
So
5.
Early in the season, you get a win against a Lake Conference team. Well, and not just any Lake Conference team, it's one of the perennials in Wayzata. So I think Rosemount might have something. I don't know if they can ride that train past Minnetonka in the semis, but I think that's going to be a team to watch there. And I feel for Andover because they had a strong season. They only lost to Maple Grove in the conference, and they took care of Anoka. I know Anoka made a late run in Section 7, and their prize is getting Minnetonka. But that group of 4, they have a strong starting 5. Do they have the speed to match Minnetonka? That's going to be the question. But as you pointed out, Eric, Minnetonka, outside of the big 3, there is some vulnerability there. And for Hopkins, it's not like they've been running over opponents. You were saying Maple Grove. I watched that game. Maple Grove had a chance to win it. That second meeting with Minnetonka was a close one. The first one, Minnetonka, I think, was able to make a run. And there have been some other cases this season. Oh, Hopkins, St. Michael, Abbeville, round two. Pat and I were both there for that one. Hopkins had to squeak that one out in overtime. They just made a couple of extra plays in the later stages. So they're not exactly the runaway favorite. They should have more than enough to get past White Bear Lake, but in that semifinal, that that's not going to be easy because Lakeville North, if you recall, in the summer series, those two teams split. And Maple Grove, they would love another chance at Hopkins, knowing how close they got the first time and what Odie's been able to do. I think Ava Cassette, this was her first full year back from injury. Yep. Claire Stern, that's their big three. And those three, you can tell, have been together for a long time. I talked to Jordan and I think Ava after the Andover game and Claire a couple of times before that. There's a lot of chemistry with that Maple Grove squad. So I feel like take your pick. There's a lot of great names to follow. And then I will give a plug to STMA because they found a way to get back into state and found a way to compete without Tessa Johnson. It's like opposite sides of the coin. Hopkins, what's going to happen because they don't have all these D1s in their starting five. For STMA, just about everyone came back except for Tessa Johnson, and both found a way to make it into state. But I feel, as Pat has mentioned before, the Lake Conference affiliation prepares them immensely because you get a tough non-conference slate, and then you face more tests that mold you for postseason play. So I think 4A, I know it was a fun battle last year for the title. I feel like this year is going to be even more exciting.
I mean, you look at Lakeville North, they played Hopkins at the tip-off classic to 1 point.
That's right. That's right.
It was 13-0. I laughed. I go, this is a blowout. It ends up being a 1-point game.
And Gabby Benton had a shot at the buzzer to win it. I mean, Liv played good defense. I mean, it was, and I'll give a shout to Elena Bowe. As good as Liv McGill is, and I would say she's one of the best in 4A, if not the best in 4A. Elena Bowe's defense on her in that game. I've never seen someone have the size to contest Liv at the basket and when she's rising up, but also the speed to stick with her. And Elena Bowe kind of took her out of that game. And all of a sudden then it was, at the time, it was early in the season. So you had those new pieces that are like, we're not used to having to be the one to shoot these. We're not used to, you have people that were in positions that they weren't in before. Although Hopkins, how lucky is the team getting to replace one Woodson with another, with a carbon copy of what the other one is, just a better shooter a little bit, I would say.
I'll argue he's a better shooter and scorer than, she's an outstanding player and she'll carry the mantle for them next year for sure.
So I'm curious for year two, because it could go either side. What's the best potential second round matchup in 4A? We'll start with Pat.
Oh man, the best second round, I would say a Lake Conference battle between St. Michael and Minnetonka. When you get a chance to play somebody the third time and they've been good games and they're great coaches, it's going to be spectacular good. Yeah, that'll be a great one. And the other side could be really interesting because both teams provide a different style to Hopkins in the semifinals over there. The inside outside for Lake North. And, again, it helps Maple Grove to have seen these teams. You don't go there and freeze up because, oh my God, it's Hopkins. We've played them. We had them in a one possession game late and had a chance. And so I said the semifinals this year across the board, I think are going to be great. Buckle up Thursday or Saturday and let's have some great basketball action. It'll be a lot of fun.
Even that first St. Michael and Minnetonka, that was the first game they that first time they played. Jaquela was out, and it was at Minnetonka, and St. Michael lost by 9. And if you look at the stats, they missed 11 free throws. So I'm like, if you make your free throws, you pull the upset. So, Mike, which side of the bracket you going on for best potential matchup? Either way.
I'd say cozy up and just enjoy that Thursday night. I'm actually covering another tournament, so I'll have to sneak a few peeks on my laptop for the live stream. Oh boy. Yeah. The prospect, well, the prospect that we could have two round threes among Lake Conference teams is in itself exciting, but I feel like whoever gets through the Maple Grove Lakeville North game and plays Hopkins, I would say that I'll just go with that because Pat, I think, covered the other side well, and I feel like the semifinals could be that close. There's not a lot of separation, even if the records might say otherwise between Hopkins, Minnetonka, St. Michael, Abbeville. But Lakeville North split the summer series, came within a point of beating Hopkins in the regular season meeting. Maple Grove, they found a way to hang with Hopkins, and for a team that had been snake bit twice in section play the last couple of years, now they finally get a chance to affirm what a lot of us knew about Mark Cook and what he's been able to do year in and year out for Maple Grove. And their non-conference schedule included the Power Five of the Lake Conference and Providence Academy. Got a couple of wins against EP and Wyzetta and Providence Academy. That's not a win you can ignore. I think whoever Hopkins faces in the semifinal, it will be a battle because both are highly familiar, both have a glimpse or an idea of how you can get to them, how you can get around them, and you have a lot of experience. I feel that Lakeville North Maple Grove game, I feel, and not just because it's 4-5, but that's such a great quarterfinal to set up that showdown. So I'd say whoever Hopkins plays in the semifinals, and no offense to White Bear Lake, I just don't think the Bears have enough to hang with Hopkins. I know they scheduled tough early in the season to get them to state, but it would take a lot for White Bear Lake to upset Hopkins, I think. So Hopkins, Lakeville North, and Maple Grove, whoever Hopkins has to play, I think will be the best second round game. But if it's Minnetonka STMA, I'd say get your popcorn ready for that one because there's going to be a fun chess match going on there too.
And now the fun part. We're going to go to Pat first. Who's the prediction to walk away with the 4A title?
I'm going to give you a trivia question first. I want
Deal.
you to set the over under on the year that Section 7 4A wins a quarterfinal game. The last time they won a quarterfinal in boys or girls was the last century in 1999. It's been 25 years. It's like White Bear hockey. They haven't won a quarterfinal game
Oh, goodness.
in 5 years. And I don't think this is going to be the year either. But for me, I still think it's coming down to Minnetonka and Hopkins. And I think the difference in the game will be if Minnetonka can get something out of their other kids. I think Aaliyah Crump is turning into maybe the best player in 4A. She's starting to involve her teammates better. She plays both ends of the floor well. I love their point guard, Wright. Crump made so many plays when they beat Hopkins, but Wright ran the entire game at the pace Minnetonka needed because McKinley was in foul trouble. McKinney was in foul trouble all night. The other kids weren't doing anything. Crump was keeping alive, but Wright just was making all the right decisions and plays. If they get a little bit out of those other kids with McKinney and Crump and Wright, I think they're going to win.
You going Tonka? Deal. Mike, your turn. Who we going with?
Well, like 2A, I feel it is that close where the champion. I'll say this and watch someone's going to win by 20 or 30. I don't think that's going to happen this year. I really think it speaks to the growth of some of the top teams in Minnesota because Pat was talking about the Wagner-Dahlman battle 10 years ago. And I remember, in 3A, 4A, you had a lot of runaway wins in state tournament competition. And that you still get those from time to time, but I feel like things have changed in the subsequent years where when the Hopkins had their three-peat and just ran laps around the field, much like the Yukon women did in the 2010s. Eventually, other teams figure out what do we have to do to match them. And in the case of Minnetonka, I guess their solution was, hey, let's go get the coach from Hopkins.
Yeah.
There was more to it than that, of course. But for a champion, in the first meeting, I know Hopkins shot the ball, if I remember correctly, extremely well. Minnetonka had a tougher time, and that allowed Hopkins to build a cushion. Would you expect that in a third meeting with Minnetonka? Maybe not. And as I look up and down this field, I feel like I would go with Hopkins. It's not that I doubt Minnetonka or St. Michael Albertville, but I feel like, yes, they haven't put up those runaway wins like they used to, but they have found ways to win. You mentioned the Lakeville North game. They were able to hang on by the skin of their teeth. St. Michael Albertville gave them a spirited battle in the second meeting of that series. And McGill, I think, went off for 32, 34 points.
Mm-hmm.
Liv, Aaliyah Krupp may be the best player in 4A, but Liv, to me, is the best point guard in that 4A field. And like Olivia Olson, Pat, I have no idea how you're going to decide Miss Basketball because I've watched McGill and Olson for years, and they both make everyone around them better. But Liv McGill has such strong smarts with ball handling, floor awareness, knowing when to attack, knowing when to set up her teammates. And Tatum Woodson, you mentioned, she having something of a breakout year. Irma Walker has come up big in a few instances. Ava Cupido helps bolster that backcourt. She comes off the bench, gives them a spark.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of familiarity. It seems strange after we all thought, is it last year? Was that it for Hopkins that I'm picking them again? But they lost only once in conference play. That to me doesn't happen. Yeah, ultimately, that's what it boils down to, those crunch time performances. And Hopkins, in all but one instance, has come out on top. And I think that carries some weight heading into state. And you have a lot of players that are ready to prove that they can continue the legacy, carrying that baton that Agara has, who will be playing in her first day. And actually, a lot of Hopkins alumni going to be playing in the tournament here in a little bit, the big one. But what Agara and Battle and Taylor Woodson, what they did a few years ago, what Paige did before that. This Hopkins group may not have the superstars of those teams, but they've got a lot of grit and they have a lot of chemistry and they are just strong, sound athletes. So I think Hopkins pulls it out again, but Minnetonka could easily win it as well with that big three. And I wanted to add something, Pat, to what you saw with Minnetonka and Eric as well. I think McKinney, this was her first full year back from injury, and her speed is nearly unmatched. I think that's what's allowed Minnetonka to go on the run they have and
absolutely
kind of bring shades of what Brian Cosgriff did at Hopkins. But again, my money's on the team that has found a way to do it even without the best talent all the time. I think that is going to be on the back of their minds when you face those pressure situations. So give my chips to Hopkins and we'll see what happens.
Going back to what you said, at the end of this, I was going to ask Pat, I'm like, can you confirm that one of the Miss Minnesota basketball is going to have the part live in their name? I feel like that's a pretty almost 100% that one of them is going to have live in the name.
Every time I get asked that question, Eric, I go, who do you think should be in the final five?
I know a final two. I know a final two. And then I'll also say, before I go mine, I always joke around with Coach Starks and Alexis Garcia, the assistant with Hopkins. I joke with them, I say, because they're 1-2 in state title games the last 3 years. And I told them, I said, first of all, I said the Chaska one. I said, that's the house that Whalen built. And I said Mallory had committed and Maya hadn't yet, so they had a gopher on their team. That's why they won that year. And I joked with them last year. I'm like, you didn't have a gopher on your team in the barn. You can't win without a gopher on your team. And so I'm gonna break my own rule because I think Tonka does have a gopher on their team. I just think with Hopkins, you see there's a different connectivity between the players. And like you said, kind of what Pat said, everyone knows their role. Everyone knows where they're kind of supposed to do, supposed to be. Liv is playing the most kind of under control and most like with pace and energy, and she brings her normal intensity. And then you even have games. I think she's improved her 3-point shooting this year. Like there's the mark on her used to be sag off, make her be a shooter. So that way she couldn't get like a head of steam going to the rim. She's burned teams doing that. In Hopkins' win against Providence, she had 4 threes. You know, in the game against Minnetonka, her and then the breakout player in 4A of Lauren Hillshire, she came in and she's hitting threes and Tatum's hitting threes. And that's, I just think there's, you know, we've talked about there's something about being there and knowing you can do it. And I mean, even as great as Tessa Johnson was, if you have 10 more seconds on the clock last year for 4A championship, it might not have been St. Michael Albertville.
It might not have.
So that's why I think Hopkins is going to get back there. I think you have maybe one of the most intense, most anticipated championship matchups if you have round 3 of Minnetonka and Hopkins to close out the 2024 state tournament. But I'm going to give the nod to Hopkins on that one.
Couple of things I wanted to highlight. The Jeremy Post White Bear, 9th time in 18 years they've made it to the state tournament. And I can't tell you the name of one player he's had in 18 years going into our Hall of Fame this October. Jim Lean is on our Miss Minnesota, not in very good health from Walker Hackensack Akeley. Made it to the state tournament on Friday night for the first time in 46 years. I can't, there was tears on the Bram bench. Nothing close to how many were happening on the Walker Hackensack Akeley bench. Every fan out of the stands, I swear, came down and hugged him on the bench. And I'm so happy for him having that opportunity to get there to the state tournament. So those two are 2 special ones for me, and I wanted to give them a shout out.
There you go. I like it.
And I was going to say, Pat, on the Jeremy Post, I covered Section 4A in those playoffs, and I want to give them props. I know I said they would be a heavy underdog in their quarterfinals, but Jeremy Post, to me, I think one reason why he's getting the Hall of Fame nod, White Bear Lake, if they had maybe one of those dynamic playmakers like a McGill or so, I think they can make a deeper run. They did get a silver medal back in 2010. They ran into Rachel Banham and Cassie Rochelle at Lakeville North. How crazy would that be if Lakeville North found its way back into the championship? Bergstrom in his first year, it's like he never left. But White Bear Lake, they're always one of those teams that you may not be able to name them like other teams who their best player is, but they almost always find a way to compete. They just have a soundness about them that gets them in that position. So
I'd compare it to Chris Orr and Rosemount. You don't want to play either one of them. Their teams take on the personality of those coaches, and they are dog tough.
I mean, you look at that year that Rosemont was runner up to the Mallory Hire and Kennedy Sanders show of Chaska. And that was back during the COVID years. So they had like the weird, like northeast or west north, whatever it was.
And south brackets. Yep.
And Chaska had to go through undefeated Stillwater, undefeated Hopkins, and then the hardest game they had the entire tournament was Rosemont. I mean, and you had to win it on a last second buzzer, a last second layup by Kaylee Van Epps. I mean, that speaks to him that like they're running through like traditional power Hopkins, Stillwater, both undefeated, and the hardest game they had was against Rosemont.
Yep. It's going to be a great tournament, and I say there's more good games in the first round, top to bottom, than we've had for a while. So should be fun.
I like it. So, well, we'll wrap this up. We'll start with Mike. Any last thoughts? Any Anything you want to make sure you give a shout out to for the state tournament? I'm said we're getting close. We're 72 hours away from it kicking off.
Yes, well, I'm trying to think of any other factoids I can pull out of my hat. I thought of one because of the assignment that I drew with NSPN for Minneapolis Roosevelt. I think this is the first time in 10 years that a Minneapolis City Conference team has made state.
Oh wow.
I believe the last team to do it. And if I'm not right, please point it out to me, because when there are 32 teams every year, it's hard to make space for all of them in this puny little brain of mine.
Jeez.
But Minneapolis Washburn, I think, was the last team from Minneapolis to do it, with Chase Coley, whose sister got to play in the Big Ten tournament, and I think we'll get to play in the big show
For
in a
sure.
little while.
Oh yeah.
And then in 4A, I found this amusing. So Kevin Anderson, who you probably know, I think most of us do, he's on Miss Basketball Committee, but he charts games all over the state. And he's the one that says usually it's not all the one seeds that make it through. And in Class 4A, I know that was the case in 21, but it was all the one seeds that advanced. Now, some of them had to do it by some pretty nail-biting means. So I think that as Pat and I have been hyping up, I think that's one reason why the 4A field is going to be such fun to watch, because every entrance this year is the one seed from their section. And as far as shout outs go, you can watch the quarterfinals live on NSPN. There's bound to be some fantastic games all the way through. And just thinking of all the storylines that I've mentioned earlier, there's just so much to choose from, and they mean so much to these teams. So no lack of storylines, but those quarterfinals. Oh, and then, yeah, I know you'll be there, Eric. And if you
Mhm.
decide you want to show up in person, remember they're at Williams and the Pav. So if you've got a ticket, you can just take a quick stroll down the hall to watch a whole lot of basketball. So you don't have to go far to watch a lot of fun first round games.
If people want a little tip on Thursday, because they have the 1A in the pavilion and they have the two games that are like right towards the end of the second semifinal, they try to empty out Williams. Just go over to the pavilion on that little corner. You don't have to empty out. You can just stay in there until they reopen it and you get a pass between both ways. So there's a little tip to like you don't have to go outside. You can just make sure you like what you go back and forth on Thursday. So there's your way of avoiding having to leave Williams Arena. Just make sure like towards the end you go over to watch the 1A games.
Good call. My last shout would be I get to MC the banquet on Tuesday night at the River Center. It came back last year for the first time in a long time. Had over 1,200 last year there. All the Class A teams came down, even though they didn't play till Thursday.
Oh,
They
gee.
came all over the state on Tuesday to be part of it. And it really was a spectacular event. And I'm looking forward to year two.
That's
Hey Pat.
awesome.
Oh, hey Pat, when
Yep.
does that Final Five come out for Miss Basketball?
We always meet the Sunday morning after the state finals. So
Oh, Sunday after
be out
state.
in the
Okay,
afternoon on the yep.
because I like I said, I could name two. Trying to whittle it down to five might
Same.
be tough. But as I'm looking up and down that list, we were discussing the field. It's like, well, I feel like Jacayla Kraft maybe might sneak in there. Trinity Wilson, Jordan Zubich. I feel like Odstad, I know she didn't make it. Lakeville South came up just short, but she had a great senior season for Lakeville South. I feel, well, I can't pick just five because there's a lot of great cases to be made in that senior group, but I feel like, okay, there's at least 10 where there's a group of 10 where if I see them make that final five, I'm like, yep, that's a good one. So I guess that's the best I can do, having seen so many teams. But I was curious because I was like, oh, maybe I'll throw out a few names and see if they stick. But I think it speaks to how well they've all grown. And like, I know Kraft has taken some pretty big leaps from where she was as a sophomore when I first saw her play at STMA. And McKinney, she's fully healthy. Zubich put up some great numbers and helping put Northern Minnesota hoops on the map. So that Final Five, I think, is going to be just as tough as picking the ultimate winner. But I think it speaks to how much talent there is this year and how vast the talent pool is in the state of Minnesota.
Our top end basketball is better than it's ever been. I mean, it's got to rival most states in the union.
Oh, yeah.
For top level basketball being played. I wish our bottom wasn't separated so far away from our top, but our top end basketball is spectacular, and people are going to get a chance to see a lot of it this weekend.
I'll ask Pat a question. Do you think it'll be harder to come up with the 2024 Miss Minnesota basketball or the 2026 Miss Minnesota basketball?
I'll say 24.
Okay, I'm fair. I was thinking, I'm like, there's a lot, like there's some superstar duos at the top of those. So I don't
I'll tell
envy
you
the job.
about our committee. It is a career award. So beginning to end, no doubt some kids in their senior year have bumped their way over the top of the spectacular season and state tournament. But you look at the accomplishments in 2026, there's some spectacular players. There's probably a favorite. No, there's a long way to go between now and then. Tori McKinney missed all last year, didn't play all last year, and that factors in sometimes. But a lot of basketball still to be played.
I like it. I had to ask them. Like, I know 24 is going to be a very difficult choice. Even getting down to 5, like we talked about, is difficult. But that final choice, I don't envy your job. I'm excited to see who it will be, but I don't
It'll be
envy
a
your guys'
great discussion. It's the best group of people to be with because it's present great coaches, it's past, it's perceptions from all over the state. We try to get a balance of all classes and females and males and present coaches and old time coaches. And we put all those minds in a room and they get to talk basketball and all the games we go to and meet each other at. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to be part of it. That it'll be hard, but that's
It makes it good. That means having that many candidates has to be good.
Oh, it's great. There's no doubt about it. I mean, and this year, I could say this because the list is up for first cut. We got more small class kids on that list than ever before. Typically everybody thinks, oh, it's just the 4A kids. Not this year. They're class A to class 4A. There are so many good seniors this year that it'll be a blast.
That seeing the senior class at state this year, we're in for a great week. But I want to say a huge thank you to both of you for taking the time. We all do our predictions out here. So I said, we'll see how right we are or not. But I said, everyone in for a great week. Thank you both so much. If you want to see them, they'll be working hard at the tournament. I'll be sitting in a chair eating probably, but I'll be there. So come and find all of us. Just look for the hat for me. They'll be working in the booth and doing announcing. But I said, once again, thank you both for taking the time to join on this.
Absolute pleasure anytime.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too. Take care.
We'll do it next